Thank you for the Rav, for the schut, for opportunity. It's
speak up.
It's not everywhere that you can get an opportunity to do this, so thank you for the Rav.
Thank you for you.
So earlier in this part of the Gemara, we have Tana. I don't know if he's a Tana Amora, but the name of Natan Bar Abba is Amora, and he permitted the trimming of wicks. He permitted you to trim wicks on Yom Tov. So now it says another. We're going to say another statement that he says. So it says Amarav Natan Bar Abba Amarav. Rav Natan Bar Abba also said name Rav. Atirei Bavel Yodei Gehinomim. The wealthy of Babylonia will descend to Gehenna. So we ask, why are they going to descend to the Gehenna? So Rashi says they do not act mercifully to the poor and give them charity. So kihai, why? What's an example of this? Kihai deshabtai bal.
What's the name of this guy?
The Amora, Rav Natan Bar Abba.
Natan Bar Abba. Yeah, it's gonna find.
So kihai. What's an example of the Babylonians who didn't have mercy on the poor? Kihai deshabtai bal marinus. This is going to be shown by the story with Rav Shabtai Bar Marinus, Ikla le Babel, who visited Babylonia. He was from Israel. Ba'am minayu as iska, and he requested merchandise from the wealthy people. He wanted to do business, so he said,
Babylon or North Babylon?
So he wanted to do business, so he asked them, give me merchandise so that I could do business there, and then I'll give you back the merchandise. I just want to make some profit. So start me up, basically, he said. And they said, Velo ya'avule. But they would not give it to him. Mezoneh, he then asked for food. He said, at least give me food. Mezon namilo zainu. But they would not feed him either. The wealthy people from Babylon just wouldn't give him anything. So Amar shavda.
It was the Mitchell Rab.
Yeah, it says Amar. So he said, so they wouldn't give him food and they wouldn't give him merchandise. So he said, what's going on here? So he said, Amal Shabtai said, Hani me'erev Rav katu. He said, these wealthy people must have descended from the Erev Rav, because the Erev Rav is a bad comment. So he's saying Dichtiv, for it is written. How do you know? Because it's written in Dvarim. V'natan lecha rachamim v'rechamcha. He will bestow upon you the attribute of compassion. Hashem says that I will give you, not only will I be merciful to you, I'm going to give you the attribute of compassion. So Jews get the attribute of compassion. He will give you the compassion. And since they didn't have the compassion, we know that they didn't come from Avraham Avinu. From this we learn that any Jew is compassionate with people. Is certainly a descendant of our forefather Abraham. Actually, all patriarchs, but it's only because Abraham was the one that gave charity, that we see they give charity. And anyone who is not compassionate with people, is certainly not a descendant of our forefather Abraham.
In other words, if you are not merciful and you don't care, you don't come. I mean, it doesn't mean you're not Jewish, but it means that you're not directly from Avraham Avinu. You can join along somewhere else like that.
So the Gemara says another scene of Natan Bar Abba, and it says, in the name of Rav, anyone who must look to another's tables for sustenance, olam chashech be'ado, is considered as if the world facing him is dark. It's as if there's a dark screen, black, and he can't see anything. Shenema, as the verse states in Eov, noded hu lalechem ayeh. He wanders for bread, asking where is it? Yada ki nachon be'ado yom choshech. He knows the day of darkness is ready at hand, and Rav Chizda says, Av charav enu chaim. His life is not life. He's considered dead if he has to rely on other people for his bread. You
know why is that? Because a person, that's really what a person would do when he wants to rebel against Hashem. You think, I'm sick and tired of Chaz v'Shalom going in the shadow of Hashem. I don't want to be in a shadow anymore. I want to step into the light. But when you step out of the shadow of Hashem, you realize that you're in complete darkness. So you rely on other people instead of relying to Hashem, you are in darkness. That's basically what he's saying here. So remember that. Right, David?
And now one last thing about, because we just said Rav Chizda's previous statement. It said, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis Tanu Breda, Gimel Chayin En Chayin. There are three types of people whose lives are not lives.
And it's not, their life is not worthy to be called life. Remember what I just told you before, right?
And who are they? The Elohen, Amitzapeh Shulchan Chavo, as we said, one who must look to another's table for sustenance. Umi sheishto moshelet alav, one whose wife rules over him.
Be'ezrat Hashem, Beli Neder, this week I'll try to make you a shiur on that. So I was thinking about this. So go ahead.
And lastly, Umi sheisuin moshin begufo, and one whose body is racked with pain. Ve'eshomim, and some even add, Af mi she'enoch ela chaluk echad, someone who only has one shirt, because he's
so poor.
Yeah, and there's gonna be lice on it, and he's gonna have to take off the lice. But so why didn't the Tanna Kama include this? Because they said if shad mayen bemineh, it's possible for him to check for the lice and take them out, so he's not considered. It's not that bad. So that's what I want to share with you.
Very nice.
Zakul.
Zakul Baruch. Zakul.
Alright,
Here, put this on the end. Make sure you see it.
there we go.
Yeah.
Alright, so first, thank you everyone for attending our Siyum. So definitely a pleasure and honor. Thank you, Rob, for always inspiring us to learn Torah, learn more, always strive for more, and for constantly putting up with us, in every aspect. Okay.
I don't mind putting up with you. I just do mind when you guys are not here for me to put up with you.
Okay, so now
That's
yes. So Edan and I were finishing Masechet Beitzah right now, and then a lot of people call it Beitzah. They say it's not Lashon Naki, but whatever. So that was just like one. It was interesting. I was speaking to someone about this. That this was the Masechet, whatever I was doing. I'm like, oh, are you doing Beitzah? And I didn't understand what there was. Then I remember it was just funny. Like some people, that's how people refer to it differently. Okay, fine. So when we start the Masechet, it goes through. Basically, a lot of the discussion are things that are asur and mutar on Yom Tov, and then it starts off discussing pretty much like whether an egg is muktzah or not, if it's laid on Yom Tov, what if it's laid like bin hashmashot of Yom Tov, or what if like it's not fully if it's an embryo and not an embryo. There's a lot of aspects that it discusses the Gemara in the first Mishnah, and that's how they get the name like Beitzah, like an egg, like that's really the only thing that had to do with the actual name of the Masechet, just from that first Mishnah. So it was interesting. So as we progress, okay, so that's like.
By the way, you know that the Rishonim did not call it Masechet Beitzah.
Yom Tov.
It used to be called Masechet Yom Tov.
So we start off discussing, whether an egg is muktzah or not, okay, etc. Then we go on to, that's like a lot of chapter 1. We go on to chapter 2. There's a lot of discussion about the Erev Tavshilin, and whether or not you can like cook on Yom Tov, not cook on Yom Tov, you have to prepare before, etc. It goes into Shabbat, one into the other. We progress to chapter 3, and we're discussing trapping animals on the Chag, and whether or not you can check for blemishes on these animals, if you can give it for a carbon, not give it for a carbon. Okay, we progress. Chapter 4, then there's a discussion about labor you can do on Chag, and even though you can do it, you should still do it maybe differently than you do like during the week, even though it's really mutar to do it. Then we go on to chapter 5. There's discussion about tchum, muktzah, leftovers, and like what you can do with all these different things. Okay, so then there's there's two things I saw in the Gemara that caught my attention. I guess more than the others. So there's a discussion. It says, Tane Tana Kame de Ravina, a teacher of Beitzah taught a Beitzah in the presence of Ravina. So it says Mikadesh Yisrael v'Shabbat v'Azmanim. Basically, this was a discussion whether you say Mikadesh Yisrael v'Shabbat v'Azmanim, or like when we say it like on Yom Tov, and when there's Yom Tov and Shabbat, you add them both into the same bracha. So one opinion. So it said Ravina. He's saying Mikadesh Yisrael v'Shabbat v'Azmanim. So Rabbi says that one should conclude the bracha who sanctifies, Israel, and then and Shabbat and the festival and the Chag. Amar so Ravina said to the teacher, Atu Shabbat Yisrael mikadshei le. Is it really, the Jews that sanctify Shabbat? Shabbat mikadshei v'kaima. It's Shabbat that does the sanctification, not the Jews that are doing the sanctification. So maybe we should say, Mikadesh Hashabbat v'Yisrael v'Azmanim first, not Mikadesh Yisrael v'Shabbat v'Azmanim. So the question is, what comes first, Yisrael or Shabbat in this bracha? So then, as Okay, so we go a little further. It says, rather say that Rabbi ruled who sanctifies Shabbat and then the Jews and then the Chag. So I was thinking about it. I mean, it's not such an expansion of what we just read, but pretty much it's very interesting because the whole question is whether you mention Shabbat first or you mention Yisrael first. What comes first, and obviously the one that precedes is going to be probably the one that you probably consider more important. So first comes HaShabbat. Since Shabbat, it says that Shabbat was already sanctified, in Shishit Bereshit. First Shabbat, was created, and it shows that Shabbat sanctifies us. That's why we put Shabbat first. Like since that was the ruling halacha, Shabbat came first, and then Shabbat sanctifies us as the Jews. It's not that we're sanctifying Shabbat. So we could think that we could buy the nicest things on Shabbat, but really Shabbat's doing us the favor. We're not doing a favor for Shabbat.
As they say, יותר מאשר קידשו ישראל את השבת, שמרו ישראל את השבת, שמרה השבת ישראל. More than the Jews kept the Shabbat keeps the Jews.
Yeah, so it's just also very interesting to note that, I didn't really think about that when I saw that this was like a machloket in the Gemara. What comes first? It's just interesting to think because obviously, it's both high levels, but Shabbat, it can't be matched. So then, a little further on in the Gemara, it says, there's a discussion regarding, violating Yom Tov. I guess and Shabbat, but the discussion is more about Yom Tov at this point. It says, Amar le Rava bar Rav Chanin l'Abaye. Rava bar Rav Chanin said to Abaye, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Ein mitavchin ve'ein misapkin ve'ein meraktin. It says we may not clap hands, slap thighs, nor dance on Yom Tov or Shabbat. So it says ve'idna dekach chazinan davdanachi. But nowadays we see that people do this, and we tell them no words of rebuke. So this is very interesting because I wrote down a few things about this. First, that's the whole discussion. Can we dance? Can we clap hands on Shabbat? Like a lot of people. What's so funny? So a lot of people, they get into, if they're singing and they're having, they're enjoying, sometimes we'll start to clap and whatnot, basically, and showing, joyous signs that you're enjoying, whatever is going on. So this is due to the fact that, and where this whole thing come about, the whole idea was because maybe you're going to come to fix an instrument. Back in the Beit HaMikdash, they were playing with instruments on Shabbat and on Chag. And this was normal, so maybe you eventually, like you say, outside you'd come to fix this instrument, and because it was so beautiful, but really that's the malach you're not allowed to do. Okay, fine. So now, as we progress there, so then the Rabbanon, the rabbis basically came to enact something one step further, and they said, not only are you gonna don't fix an instrument, but maybe don't even sing and dance and clap because, not sing, but dance and clap, because you're going to come to, maybe that's going to lead to you picking up an instrument, which is going to lead to something breaking, which is going to lead to you fixing it. So then the Rabbanan came to say basically the whole thing that you can't, clap your hands or dance or anything of that nature. It's really frowned upon. You shouldn't be doing it on Shabbat or Chag. So now there's another question a little further. Now Tosfot comes along and says, this decree doesn't necessarily apply as much nowadays, so we may be lenient. Because Tosfot is coming and saying that we don't have this anymore. We're not playing instruments on Shabbat and Chag, so there's not a chance you're going to come to sing and to fix an instrument. However, there's a very large and lengthy discussion on this by the poskim, whether a decree is nullified if the actual reason no longer exists. So the question, since we don't have the Beit HaMikdash anymore, maybe I could say, and it's not normal to play instruments on Shabbat, so maybe so Tosfot is basically saying maybe that reason shouldn't apply anymore because we don't carry around harps and whatnot on Shabbat. Exactly. So then, and then the Rambam comes along and he says in chapter 23 of Hilchot Shabbat he discusses and Moran, and they say that the rule is that it's a sort of clap your hands on Shabbat, and the Ramal comes along and says. Some are lenient nowadays, and we don't protest it though. And this is really kind of like what I was getting out of this whole point. if we see someone doing it, it says in the Gemara at least that you shouldn't protest them, because it's better for people to do this unintentionally than intentionally, especially if it's known that they won't listen. So the whole idea, obviously there are a lot of different communities that practice different things, and their rabbis are teaching them different things in those communities, and they're not going to listen. It's not worth getting into a fight with people about this. It's like we see
especially when you have an opinion like the Tosfot that you could rely on. It's not that they're doing it as, okay, now across the board is allowed. You have an opinion of the Tosfot. So in order to make this, you're allowed to rely on. That's all we pass it.
Yeah, and then we go even further, and then adds the Ramah based on Tosfot that some are lenient, but you should definitely try to act stringently regarding this, especially where Moran and Shulchan Aruch rule that the general rulings of the area, based on the words of the Rambam, who was chief halachic authority throughout the Middle East at that time. That's why they held that you shouldn't clap your hands and dance on Shabbat because of this whole entire thing. But the whole lesson out of this whole question whether dance, not dance, or what if I'm happy, what if it feels good though, I'm trying to praise Hashem. There's a very big lesson. Sometimes we want to serve Hashem, obviously to the best of our ability. Not even sometimes, chances are that's what we want to do. We all have that same goal at the end of the day. We're all trying to maximize our potential in serving Hashem in the best way we possibly can. And sometimes you want to feel like you have to feed it all the time. You have to do what you're feeling always. And for me personally, I'm an advocate for this. I'm for feeling what you're doing, having I guess a little spiritual whatever behind the scenes. You're feeling what you're doing. You're not doing it like a checklist. Fine, but the whole thing though. Sometimes though we need to look at the bigger picture and say, Hashem, I'd love to clap and dance for you at all times, and I want to do it. But the only reason I'm not is because the Chachamim, who I know have, say, a better internet connection with you than I do, say that they're holding at 5G, I'm only on 2G. They knew to come out with this Gezerah, and they said not to do it, therefore I'm not going to do it, even though maybe I feel like doing it. So it's very interesting, it's not always putting our emotion in front of, what a Gezerah is. If someone told me something that knows a lot more than me, I should listen to them, not just go with how I feel at that present moment. And sometimes it's a hard thing to do, because if that's how you're feeling, that's how you're feeling. But sometimes we just have to realize there are people greater than us that know more than us. So the whole idea is that the power of understanding people and human behavior, not to argue with people that are necessarily doing things different, but to try and you all come together, and they're going to have their takana with Hashem. They're going to have, however their relationship with Hashem is between them and Hashem. However mine is with Hashem, that's between me and Hashem. So, whatever, that's a very big lesson. If not the whole idea, not to be overly zealous, not to turn people away, but rather, we should all have a bracha that we should learn as much Torah as possible. We should lead by action, lead by, example, and inspire others to do the same. And that's really the whole idea.
Chazak u'baruch. Ella, תעשה את הסיום, and then we're going to daven Arvit, and then we're going to have pizza and then Gemara. Let's go, Zariz.
All right.
Adran alach.
So I go from
Isaac, ¿cómo estás? How's the Yeshiva?
So you want to do first two?
So before, Rabbi Shimon was saying that the only thing that's muktzeh is dried figs and raisins, whereas animals that are range animals are not muktzeh. So ibayit ema. If you reverse it, so how did Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, if he's passing like Rabbi Shimon, why did he say that range animals are muktzeh if only figs and raisins are muktzeh? So it says ibayit ema. If you reverse it, the range animals are like dried figs and raisins. Even though dried figs and raisins are the only ones that are muktzeh, and range animals are not, range animals are like dried figs and raisins. In as much as they were fit to use, and he sent them away. And then now they're not fit to use anymore, and that's why it's not, and that's why it's like figs and raisins. But and if you prefer say, Rabbi said this to explain the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, but he himself does not subscribe to the narrow application of muktzeh law. He therefore rules that range animals are muktzeh.
Alright, so it says, "V'bayit Eyman for first sale, u'devreihem derabanan ka'amar lehu." Rabbi said his definition of range animals, according to the opinion of the rabbis, he meant as following: "L'didiya in muktzah." As for me, I hold there is no broad application of muktzah law. Ela l'didchu, but even you who subscribes this broader application to things that are considered muktzah, odo limiyat, should at least concede to me, hechad yotzot v'rod b'bezach v'nichnasot b'riviyah rishona. Whichever animals go out and graze in the pasture during the time of Pesach, and then they return at the first rains, of the season, they're considered domestic animals and are therefore not muktzah. Because the whole question was basically whether or not what's muktzah, what's not muktzah. If an animal goes throughout, a city or the field, or he's in your property or not, like what's considered muktzah. So it says, okay, they're domestic animals, they're not muktzah. But Amruleh, Rabbanan, the rabbis answered Rabbi, Lo midibariot hen. No, they're considered range animals and are therefore muktzah. Hadran, Alaf, Mashilin. Uslikala, Masechet Beitzah. Adran, Alaf, Masechet Beitzah, Adran, Eytan, Alaf, Masechet Beitzah, Adran, Lo nitnashei minach Masechet Beitzah, Lo nitnashei minan. Lava ma hadin, lava ma datei. Yirat sam befonecha, Adonai leve'avotenu. Shadei toratcha amonotenu b'olam hazeh, V'tehei imanu l'olam haba. Chanina bar Dara, bar Baba, Nachman bar Baba, Achai bar Baba, Abba Mari bar Baba, Rabba bar Baba, Rachesh bar Baba, Sorcho bar Baba, Ada bar Baba, Dara bar Baba. Harev Adonai Eloheinu et Beit Otcha b'finu v'yodam Chaber Yisrael. V'niyeh kulanu anach v'tzeitzenu 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 Chaber Yisrael. Kulanu d'Yishamecha v'mdei Tortecha l'shma. Ma'aveh techakmeni mitzvotecha ki l'olam yili. Yili b'tamim b'chukecha l'man lo evosh. L'am lo ashkach b'kodecha. Ki b'amchi tani baruch atah Adonai l'mdei chukecha amen 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 Yisrael v'ed. מודים אנחנו לפניך אדוני ואבותינו ששמת חלקנו ביושבי בית המדרש לא שמת חלקנו ביושבי קרנות שאנו משכימים והם משכימים אנו משכימים מדברי תורה והם משכימים ודברים בטלים אנו עמלים והם עמלים אנו עמלים מקבלים שכר והם עמלים ואנו מקבלים שכר אנו רוצים והם רוצים אנו רוצים בחיל ובאה והם רוצים לבאר שחד שנאמר ואתה עליהם תורידם לבאר שחד עד שדמים אמר לא יחצו ימיהם ואני אבטח בך ירצנו לפניך אדוני כשם שתתנו לסיים מסכת ביצה כן תעזרנו להתחיל מסכתות ספרים אחרים ולסיימם ללמוד וללמד לשמוע ועשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמודך באהבה וזכור לו את כל התנועים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים יעמוד להיות זרעי שאלות תלמוד של תורה מפיהם מפי זרעי וזרע וזרעי עד עולם ותתקיים בי בתולדתך תנחה אותך בשכבך תשמור עליך ובצאותיי תשיחך כי בי ירבו ימיך וישיבו לך שלום חיים ורחמים במנה ותשמע ושם וחזרות הניות למתן נברך תמם השלום